Have you ever stopped to think that maybe you're not alone in your own mind? That those strange thoughts that suddenly arise, that unexplained fatigue, or even that weight on your chest that appears out of nowhere, might not just be the result of everyday stress. Maybe you believe it all comes down to a lack of vitamins, the pressure of routine, or even bad luck. But what if I told you there's something much deeper behind it all? Something most people prefer not to even imagine. The truth is that about 90% of people end up becoming hosts without realizing it. Silent entities, which infiltrate the most vulnerable points of our lives, assume invisible positions and begin to drain energy, manipulate emotions, and plant thoughts that are not ours. And the scariest thing is that they prefer to act precisely when we don't believe them, because then they remain hidden, acting in the shadows. Today I'll show you where these presences come in, how to recognize their signs, and most importantly, how to regain control of your energy before it's too late. Many people believe they are completely safe in their daily routine, but it is precisely in what seems mundane that openings begin to appear. Imagine that every negative thought, every outburst of anger, or every moment you give in to fear opens a small crack in your invisible field. It's like a half-open door, inviting unwanted presences in. And these doors, however subtle, are scattered throughout common situations. A tense environment, a toxic conversation, even the constant consumption of news that generates despair. All of this creates holes we don't see, but which are real. Now reflect with me. How many times have you felt suddenly exhausted after being with certain people? It's not just a coincidence. Often, this fatigue is a sign that something has been drained from you, and that, without realizing it, you've opened the door for an entity to connect. They don't ask permission, they don't knock on the door. They simply take advantage of the emotional or mental gap we offer. The more we nourish these internal states, the stronger the connection with these beings becomes, which take root like invisible parasites. These entry points also appear in moments of extreme vulnerability. When a person experiences trauma, emotional shock, or periods of profound sadness, the natural protective field is weakened. It's at this moment that entities find space to approach and establish themselves. It doesn't matter whether you believe in them or not. The connection occurs anyway, like a silent law that doesn't ask your permission. This is why many people are unable to get up after certain painful experiences, as if something greater is holding them back. Another detail few realize is that seemingly innocent habits also act as portals. For example, excessive exposure to violent content, music that carries heavy vibrations, or even places where addictions and excesses predominate. Each of these elements is like an open invitation for entities to approach and take root. The more frequent the contact, the stronger the connection becomes, and the harder it will be to realize that it's not just you controlling your thoughts and behaviors. And perhaps the most delicate point of all is the fact that almost no one teaches us how to identify these signs. We grow up believing that everything can be explained scientifically or rationally, but there are things that simply defy common logic. When you feel an invisible force pulling you down, a void that nothing can fill, or thoughts that seem not to be yours, that's when reality begins to reveal itself. The big question is, have you ever opened one of these doors without realizing it? Few people realize that the emotions that weaken us most are precisely those that feed the entities the most. Anger, envy, deep sadness, and resentment act as chains that bind us and leave us vulnerable. It's as if each emotional outburst is a meal served on a silver platter for these beings. They not only approach us in these moments, but also encourage us to remain in this cycle. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to escape a state of anger after an argument, even when rationally you know you should have moved on? It's because there's something invisible that wants to prolong that energy. These presences have a peculiar characteristic. They don't need to be visible. Their greatest weapon is subtlety. A small, repetitive thought, a nagging doubt, a feeling that nothing will work out. All of these can be induced. It's not that they create the feeling out of thin air, but rather that they amplify it, as if fanning embers until they become a fire within us. The more we believe this is a natural part of our mind, the more we become enslaved without even realizing it. Another curious point is that entities know how to disguise themselves as forms of pleasure. Often, what we believe to be a natural urge, such as the desire for excess, compulsions, or addictions, may simply be a string pulled by these presences. They feed not only on pain but also on the imbalance generated by the incessant search for immediate gratification. This is why many people feel trapped in habits they know are harmful, but simply cannot break. There is something keeping them trapped. and that something is not visible to the eye. It is at this point that the inevitable question arises: are we truly the masters of our thoughts and desires? This is a powerful reflection, because by recognizing that not everything that passes through our minds is truly ours, we take the first step toward freeing ourselves from invisible influence. Ignoring this possibility is exactly what the entities want, because the more we believe that everything boils down to biology or chance, the longer they remain hidden, feeding in silence. And here's the biggest secret: it's not fear that protects us, but awareness. When you start observing your own emotions closely, you begin to notice when something doesn't feel natural. That's when the cycle begins to break. Understanding that the invisible seduction of emotions is a trap is the key to regaining control of your own energy. But until we reach this point, most people remain like puppets, unaware that the strings are being pulled by hands they can't see. Not all entities manifest in the same way. Some are more subtle, almost imperceptible, while others become intense, leaving visible marks on a person's life. Some merely drain energy slowly, as if they were silent shadows, slowly sapping vitality. Others reveal themselves in explosions, bringing aggressive thoughts, destructive impulses, or even sleep disturbances. This diversity makes the phenomenon even more difficult to identify, because each being acts uniquely. There are presences that feed on fear, and therefore provoke situations that put us on constant alert. They induce nightmares, feelings of persecution, and even strange experiences during the night, when we are most vulnerable. On the other hand, there are those that are linked to addiction and compulsion, pushing the person repeatedly toward the same mistakes, as if it were impossible to escape a cycle. How many of us feel this way, trapped by something we can't explain? Perhaps it's not just a lack of willpower. Other presences manifest themselves more deceptively, almost as if they were friends. They offer a false sense of pleasure or power, making the person believe they are gaining something when, in fact, they are being used as a source of energy. This is one of the most dangerous traps, because it is difficult to distrust something that seems to bring satisfaction. But over time, the mask slips and the person realizes they are increasingly exhausted, empty, and without purpose. There are also presences linked to specific environments. Places marked by suffering, violence, or excess tend to harbor these energies, as if they were invisible deposits. Anyone who enters such spaces immediately feels a weight, a malaise that doesn't know where it comes from. And if the person is already fragile, they run the risk of bringing one of these companions with them. This is why we often return from certain places with a strange sensation that we can't rationally explain. But perhaps most important of all is understanding that identifying the type of presence isn't an invitation to fear, but rather to awareness. Recognizing that there are different forms of manifestation helps us understand that we're not imagining things, that there's a hidden logic to this process. And when awareness expands to this reality, we automatically open space to seek ways of protection and liberation. Ignorance is what keeps these forces alive. Knowledge is what weakens them. Often, people don't realize they're being influenced because the signs are subtle and blend into everyday life. One of the first symptoms is a sudden loss of vitality. You wake up feeling unmotivated, as if your body is heavier than usual, even after a good night's sleep. This constant fatigue can't be explained by medical tests or routine, and the more you try to justify it, the more confusing the situation becomes. It's as if something invisible is slowly draining your vital energy, leaving a void in its place. Another common symptom is unexplained emotional swings. Suddenly, you feel sad, angry, or anxious, without anything external triggering it. These sudden changes can be reflections of entities that feed on these emotions. They stimulate feelings that aren't born within you, but seem to emerge out of nowhere, dominating your mind and making it difficult to distinguish what's truly yours. This is one of the most overlooked signs, as people often attribute it to stress or chance. Sleep is also a fertile ground for detecting clues. Recurring nightmares, the feeling of being watched at night, or even unexplained paralysis are common manifestations of the presence of entities. While the body rests, consciousness becomes more accessible, and it is at this moment that these beings find space to approach. Many people report waking up exhausted, as if they had fought invisible battles throughout the night. Furthermore, intrusive thoughts are one of the most telling signs. You might be feeling calm, and suddenly a negative, heavy thought arises that doesn't make sense in that context. This could be an invisible whisper trying to influence your behavior. Repeating these thoughts ends up convincing the person they're their own, but in reality, they're external stimuli seeking to plant seeds of self-sabotage. From there, self-destructive behaviors emerge, without realizing their true origin. Finally, one of the strongest signs is difficulty maintaining spiritual and emotional balance. Whenever you try to seek peace, meditate, or simply focus on something positive, it feels like something gets in the way, like an invisible force creating obstacles. This resistance isn't natural, it's a reaction from these forces when they realize you're trying to free yourself. The closer you get to full awareness, the more intense the attacks become. Recognizing this is crucial to not giving up halfway, because persistence is what weakens these forces. The entities don't appear clearly, they don't reveal themselves easily. They prefer to hide in the most common places, precisely where human surveillance is least. One of their most frequent refuges is environments charged with negative emotions. Where there is a lot of fighting, gossip, or resentment, they find fertile ground to establish themselves. It's as if they absorb every word spoken in a tone of spite, and every look filled with envy, becoming stronger. Another powerful hiding place lies in our daily habits. Those practices that seem harmless but create imbalance actually act as shelters for invisible presences. For example, spending too much time in front of screens, consuming content that stimulates fear, violence, or inner emptiness. In this state, the mind becomes passive and vulnerable, opening the door to external influences. Constant repetition creates an ideal breeding ground for these influences to take hold unnoticed. These presences also hide in toxic emotional bonds. Relationships marked by manipulation, distrust, or emotional dependence serve as anchor points for entities. They feed on the dense energy produced by pain and confusion, perpetuating the cycle of suffering. This is why some people feel unable to leave certain relationships even when they realize how much they are being harmed. It's not just emotional attachment, there's something else holding them back. Physical places also serve as hiding places. Abandoned houses, old hospitals, prisons, and even places where tragedies have occurred accumulate invisible presences. Anyone who passes through these spaces immediately feels a change in the atmosphere, as if the air has become heavier and harder to breathe. These impressions are not a figment of the imagination, but rather signs that entities are there, preserving memories and dense energies. The longer someone remains in these places, the greater the chance of carrying a fragment of these presences with them. And perhaps the most dangerous hiding place of all is within one's own mind. When a person doesn't know their own thoughts and doesn't cultivate self-awareness, they open the door for entities to camouflage themselves as a natural part of the mind. They whisper, repeat ideas, manipulate perceptions, and the person believes it all comes from within. At this point, it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish where one's identity ends and external influence begins. This is where the true risk lies, losing oneself without even realizing it. One of the entity's greatest tricks is to confuse. They don't arrive clearly. They don't introduce themselves by saying who they are, but they infiltrate the mind as if they were ordinary thoughts. Suddenly, you begin to doubt yourself, your choices, your own capabilities. This confusion doesn't arise out of nowhere. It's induced little by little until the person can no longer differentiate what is theirs from what is imposed. It's as if an invisible fog takes over consciousness, obscuring the natural clarity we all carry. This manipulation occurs primarily through constant doubt. For example, you decide to take an important step, but something inside you creates 1,000 justifications for not acting. It's not just caution. Often it's the hidden voice of these presences which prefer to keep you stagnant, draining energy rather than allowing you to evolve. The confusion becomes so convincing that the person believes they are being rational, when in fact, they are being driven to stagnation. Another aspect of the mental game is self-sabotage. How many times have you given up on something good because you believed you weren't capable, even though you had everything you needed to achieve it? This disbelief isn't always born from you, but from influences that want you to remain small and powerless. They create a feeling of inadequacy, as if it were natural to live in constant limitation. Over time, the person accepts this condition as absolute truth, without realizing they are living below their true potential. Entities also take advantage of information overload. We live in a world constantly bombarded with stimuli, and in this excess, the mind weakens, becomes lost, and becomes more vulnerable. It is in this fertile ground that influences infiltrate, creating more confusion, more doubt, and more internal noise. The more mental noise there is, the less a person can hear their true inner voice. This is where disconnection occurs, and this is exactly what these presences desire. The secret to breaking this game is the awareness of observing your own thoughts. When you begin to ask yourself, is this thought really mine? You create a barrier against manipulation. Clarity arises when there is questioning, because entities cannot resist the light of mindfulness. They survive on autopilot, in distraction, in passivity. But when you begin to notice, the confusion loses its power, and what seemed so convincing reveals itself to be nothing more than a cheap trick. There is a period when human vulnerability reaches its peak, moments of profound grief. When someone loses a loved one, faces a serious illness, or goes through an intense emotional crisis, it is at this moment that the protective field weakens. The person is fragile, open, searching for answers, and it is then that entities find the perfect opening to approach. This is not a punishment, but a natural movement. Where there is fragility, there is room for infiltration. In these difficult moments, it's common to feel as if something weighs even more heavily than the pain itself. Sadness seems to drag on for weeks, months, or even years, as if it weren't just human suffering, but an extra burden placed on our shoulders. This invisible weight betrays the presence of something beyond normal experience. The person feels sucked in, drained, and the more they try to get up, the more they seem to be pulled down. Another clear sign is the repetition of hopeless thoughts. It's as if a silent voice insists, "It won't get better. You won't make it. It's useless to try." These phrases don't arise by chance, but are like ropes thrown to keep the person tied to the state of suffering. The more the mind believes them, the stronger the entity becomes, as it is receiving exactly the energy it desires. It's a vicious cycle that traps the person in a labyrinth with no way out. However, it is precisely in these periods of fragility that the opportunity for transformation also arises. Because when a person decides to face the burden, when they seek light amidst the darkness, something powerful happens. Inner strength awakens. The entities cannot tolerate this change because it breaks the energetic dependence they have created. What was once vulnerability becomes a chance for rebirth, if the person does not give up. The key is to understand that fragility is not a sign of weakness, but rather a call to look deeper. If you realize that the pain isn't just yours, that there's an extra weight trying to pull you down, you begin to free yourself. This simple act of acknowledging already reduces the power of the influence because it doesn't resist when unmasked. It's at this moment that healing begins, and the inner light shines again, even amidst the worst storms. Few realize that daily habits act as invisible threads that connect or separate entities. Each repeated choice creates an energetic pattern, and the more this pattern is nurtured, the stronger the connection becomes, with that which vibrates at the same frequency. Healthy, elevated habits create a natural barrier, but destructive habits open doors and keep them open. This is why it is often so difficult to change behavior. It is not just a matter of willpower, but of external influence holding the threads. Addictions are the clearest example. Whether it's excessive eating, drinking, drugs, or even the excessive consumption of negative information, each repetition creates a kind of invisible contract. The person believes it's merely a momentary pleasure, but deep down, they're offering vital energy as payment. With each relapse, the bond strengthens and the feeling of helplessness increases. Many believe they can't stop because they're weak, but the truth is, they're dealing with something that goes beyond the personal sphere. But it's not just addictions that act as portals. Small self-sabotaging habits such as constant procrastination, destructive self-criticism, or repetitive negative thoughts also attract invisible presences. Every time a person puts themselves down, they feed something that grows and takes root within them. The habit of cursing oneself, for example, opens the door for entities that feed on the energy of low self-esteem, perpetuating the cycle of pain and stagnation. Interestingly, even seemingly neutral habits can serve as a gateway. For example, when someone repeatedly watches content charged with violence or sadness, even without realizing it, they are absorbing dense energies that settle in their field. This repetition creates a connection with presences that vibrate at the same frequency. It's like tuning into a radio station. The longer you stay on it, the stronger the signal becomes, until it becomes difficult to change frequencies. Recognizing the power of habits is essential. It's not about living in fear, but about being aware that every choice is an invitation. When you choose to eat more consciously, cultivate inner silence, or even seek moments of genuine joy, you strengthen a natural barrier against influences. But when you repeatedly give in to destructive habits, you are, without realizing it, signing a silent permission slip for invisible presences to remain by your side. Human relationships are one of the greatest channels of connection with entities because they involve a constant exchange of energy. Each interaction is a bridge, and the closer and more intense the relationship, the stronger the exchange. This means that if a person is connected to negative presences, they inevitably transfer some of that influence to those around them. It's as if energy circulates from one to the other, creating invisible currents that keep everyone trapped in the same field. In toxic relationships, this effect is even more evident. Frequent arguments, manipulation, excessive jealousy, and emotional dependence are veritable feasts for entities. They feed on the heavy burden of these conflicts, encouraging them to repeat themselves indefinitely. The person believes they're fighting only with their partner or family member, but in reality, they're fueling something bigger, wanting to keep the cycle going. That's why it's so difficult to break free from such relationships. It's not just emotional attachment, but a web of invisible influences. Another crucial point is that entities don't just connect through romantic or family relationships, but also through friendships and social groups. Whenever a group gathers around gossip, complaints, or destructive practices, an atmosphere ripe for the presence of invisible beings is created. They not only establish themselves but also encourage the group to remain united by these negative bonds, making it even more difficult to break the dynamic. Often people feel that when they leave certain people, their mood improves, their body feels lighter, and their mind calms. This is no coincidence. It's a momentary interruption of the energetic exchange with someone burdened by dense presences. Similarly, when someone returns to a harmful environment, the weight returns immediately, as if iron chains had been placed on them again. This is one of the clearest ways to perceive the invisible influence on relationships. The secret lies in understanding that maintaining connections doesn't mean closing yourself off from the world, but rather cultivating awareness of exchanges. When you begin to ask yourself, does this relationship elevate me or drain me? You're already taking a step toward cutting invisible chains. And by strengthening connections based on support, genuine love, and mutual growth, you create a barrier against negative influences. This way, you not only protect yourself but also become a source of light, capable of weakening the forces that try to infiltrate human bonds. Entities don't limit themselves to acting only in the invisible realm. They leave visible traces in the body and mind. The human body, being sensitive to energies, reacts in subtle but clear ways when it is being drained. One of the first manifestations is a feeling of constant heaviness, as if each movement were more difficult than it should be. The body becomes sluggish and lacks energy, and often no doctor can find the real cause of this exhaustion. Unexplained pain is also a common symptom. People experience pressure in their head, muscle aches, or even palpitations for no apparent reason. These aren't physical illnesses, but rather energetic manifestations that manifest in the body. It's as if an invisible influence finds a way to express itself through matter, making itself felt, letting the person know something is wrong. The problem is that most people ignore these signs, believing them to be just everyday stresses. In the mind, the signs are even more evident. Repetitive, heavy thoughts, a feeling of constant threat, fear without apparent cause. All of these are reflections of the presence of these influences. The person feels trapped in a mental cycle from which they cannot escape, as if they are always revolving around the same problems. Clarity disappears, intuition weakens, and everything seems more difficult than it really is. Another striking sign is the loss of pleasure in the simple things in life. What once brought joy, like meeting friends or a moment of leisure, suddenly loses its luster. The world seems gray, colorless, and devoid of purpose. This profound apathy is a sign that vital energy is being steadily drained. When life loses its flavor, it's a sign that something invisible is feeding on what should be its source of strength. But perhaps the most painful mark is the feeling of no longer being one's own master. When thoughts, emotions, and even actions seem to come from elsewhere, the person begins to doubt their own identity. It's as if they're losing control of who they really are. This is the most dangerous point, but also the beginning of a possible turning point. Because when you realize something strange is happening, awakening begins to approach, and the power of transformation becomes possible. Just as there are signs of influence, there are also signs that the process of liberation is underway. The first is sudden clarity. It's when you suddenly realize that the negative thought isn't yours, that the emotion wasn't born within you. This separation between self and influence is a powerful milestone because it breaks the cycle of total identification. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. The shadow doesn't disappear immediately, but it can no longer dominate in the same way. Another sign is a feeling of lightness. After a period of practices that elevate your energy, such as moments of silence, contact with nature, or sincere prayer, the body feels looser, the mind clearer, and the heart more peaceful. This lightness isn't just psychological, it's physical, noticeable, almost as if a heavy backpack has been lifted off your back. It's one of the most obvious signs that the influence is weakening. The return of joy is also a remarkable sign. Small things make sense again. A smile, a song, a simple conversation. It's as if life regains its lost colors, revealing that vital energy is flowing again without being drained. When the soul once again becomes enchanted by everyday details, it's a sign that the protective field is being restored and that the invisible influence is losing ground. Another important point is the change in relationships. Toxic people begin to naturally distance themselves, while new, more positive connections emerge. This isn't a coincidence, but a direct reflection of the energy shift. When you vibrate at a higher frequency, those who feed on the burden can no longer remain by your side. This distancing may seem painful at first, but it's a necessary step toward consolidating liberation. Finally, intuition strengthens. That inner voice, previously muffled by the noise of mental confusion, begins to become clearer and more constant. It's as if a silent guide resurfaces within you, showing you the way and warning you of pitfalls. This strengthening is one of the greatest gifts of liberation because it restores self-confidence and connection with your essence. It's living proof that light can always overcome shadows, as long as you're determined not to give up. The good news is that just as there are gateways, there are also ways to erect shields that make it nearly impossible for entities to approach. The first step to building this protection is to cultivate elevated inner states. Emotions like gratitude, love, and serenity act like flames that repel dense presences. These forces cannot support the vibration of genuine joy because they feed solely on emotional weight. The more you keep your light burning, the less space there is for shadows. But this shield isn't formed solely by feelings. It requires daily discipline. Moments of silence, deep breathing, and connection with your essence create layers of protection that build over time. It's like strengthening a muscle. The more you train, the more resilient it becomes. When the mind calms and the heart finds balance, a natural barrier is erected, and entities, no matter how insistent, cannot find a way in. Another fundamental element is the energetic cleansing of environments. The places where you live and spend the most time accumulate invisible impressions, and if left unattended, they become havens for unwanted presences. Opening the windows, letting in sunlight, keeping the house tidy, and even choosing music that elevates energy transforms the space into a protective shield. Environmental harmony directly reflects inner harmony, creating a fortress against external influences. Protection is also strengthened through the choice of companions. Being around people who cultivate good energy and pure intentions acts as a circle of light, where each person strengthens the other. Conversely, remaining in environments filled with criticism, gossip, and resentment opens cracks in the protective field. Therefore, consciously selecting relationships is not selfish, but an act of preserving one's own energy. And above all, the invisible shield is built with awareness. The more you recognize the existence of these presences and learn to identify their tricks, the less vulnerable you become. Ignorance is the entity's greatest ally. Perception is their greatest weakness. When you look them in the eye and say, "I know you exist, but you will have no power over me," you've already erected half of the shield. The rest is formed through the constant practice of raising your energy and protecting your spaces. After learning to erect a protective shield, the next step is to build an insurmountable field, where your very presence is enough to ward off any dense energy. This field isn't something you create overnight. It's born of consistency. The more you dedicate yourself to strengthening your inner self, the more intense this invisible circle that surrounds your life becomes. There comes a point where even negative people can't stay around you for long because the field bothers them. This field begins to form through the conscious choice of what you consume. Just as the body needs healthy food, so do the mind and soul. If you feed on heavy information, the field weakens. If you choose content that uplifts and inspires, the field strengthens. This selection is one of the most powerful acts of protection because you become the guardian of your own frequency, deciding what enters and what doesn't enter your life. Another factor that broadens this field is the cultivation of presence. Being fully present in each moment, without getting lost in thoughts of the past or worries about the future, creates a dense energy of awareness that repels influences. Entities live on autopilot in distraction. When you are present, there is no room for them to infiltrate. Mindfulness is like an invisible wall that protects the present and prevents anything external from taking control. The field also expands with practices of deep connection. Caring for your body, breath, and mind creates a synergy that multiplies your inner strength. It's as if every conscious gesture, from drinking water with intention to walking with the earth beneath your feet, strengthens the invisible fibers that form your protection. This connection transforms you into a beacon, and no being that feeds on shadows can resist the intensity of such a consistent light. And finally, the insurmountable field solidifies when you begin to radiate not only to yourself but also to the world. When your energy becomes a source of healing for others, entities not only retreat, but also weaken within the collective. Your life ceases to be solely about individual protection and becomes about transforming those around you. This is the ultimate liberation, when you not only resist the shadows, but become a light so strong that it dissolves any darkness. After this entire journey, it's time to look within and realize that deep down, there has always been a force waiting to awaken within you. The entities, as frightening as they may seem, don't have absolute power. They survive only on what we give them: our attention, our energy, and our belief that we are weak. When we break this cycle, when we remember who we truly are, their entire game crumbles. Returning to your essence is like lighting a flame that never goes out, because it doesn't depend on anything external, only on what has always been within you. This return begins when you recognize that you are not a victim, but a creator of your own reality. Even amidst the most severe influences, there is always a choice: to continue being led or to decide to take the helm of your own life. This decision is not easy because it requires courage, breaking old habits and facing uncomfortable truths. But it is in this confrontation that freedom emerges. Each step you take toward your essence is a thread broken from the invisible chains that tried to imprison you. Over time, you'll realize that liberation isn't just about pushing away entities, but about transforming yourself into someone who no longer gives them space. The focus shifts from fighting the shadow to expanding the light, and the more you strengthen your energy, the more naturally you attract experiences, people, and situations aligned with your true essence. Life, which once seemed gray and heavy, begins to reveal colors, opportunities, and signs that were previously hidden. This process also awakens a sense of mission. When you understand that you've overcome your own internal battles, you begin to feel the desire to help others realize the same, because you realize that the suffering of many doesn't come solely from themselves, but from these invisible influences that feed on ignorance. Sharing this awareness is a way to expand the light in the world, becoming not only protected, but also protective. Every word, every gesture, every conscious action becomes an act of collective liberation. And this is where I end this journey with you. If this message touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, because together we can delve even deeper into these transformative truths. And I want to propose a symbolic pact. If you've made it this far with me, write the keyword in the comments: light. This way, I will know how many have truly walked to the end and are ready to keep their flame burning against any darkness.